Hey there. We are just getting ready to go live here. We've got this actually showing up on Instagram. I just need to set it up to go into Facebook as well. That'll take just a moment. So you're going to see your screen bouncing around a little bit. It's great to have you with me on the webinar. Thank you for being there. We are just getting Instagram to, whoops, press the live button. I'm not sure what's up with Instagram. It doesn't look like it's behaving properly. We may have to give that another go in just a second. But I do need to, yes, get us set up in Facebook as well. Yes, indeed. So we are just about ready. There we go. And oops, that didn't work. There it is. Ta-da. Almost there. And technology is great. Sometimes it's a little on the slow side, but isn't this fun? We can be doing this with people from all over the world, and that is a ton of fun. And so, just about have this ready to go live on Facebook. There we go. Let's hope that works. Facebook has been kind of finicky lately and has not been very cooperative with getting live streams to work. So when it does work, we do the happy dance. All right. And my Instagram doesn't seem to be wanting to go live right now. That's very weird. Instagram is usually not the problem. It's usually Facebook. All righty, we're going to do that there. We are going to just pop over one slide for just a moment. Interesting. Okay. There we go. All right. Haha, you have to push all the right buttons. Apparently I forgot to push one important button for the Instagram Live, and now they are populating. This is good. This is good. And so we are just then finishing up the Iridology Facebook group. Yes, that worked. Okay. Doing the happy dance. All righty, here we go. Let's get rolling here, right? Let's get rolling. I would love it as we begin if you would just post in the chat if you're on Facebook or on Instagram, or if you're on Facebook with me, or if you are on the webinar, let me know where you're from. I think it's great fun to see how global this is, and I love, love, love working with it like that. So I would love it if you would engage with me here and simply tell me where you are at on the face of the planet right now, participating with me in this little webinar, this little web class. All right, and while those are coming in, we are going to get rolling. Today we're talking about the language of iridology, old and new. And this is a really important topic because the language has changed. The iridology has also changed. And for those people who have actually kept up with it, good for them. Hi, Tamara, good to see you on Instagram. Thanks for joining me. For those of you who've been around for a while in the world of iridology, you will recognize that 40, 50, 60 years ago, the prevailing style of iridology in North America was the Jensenian style. And we're ever so grateful to Jensen for the work he did. We also know that there has been research that has happened since then, and that some of what Jensen taught, he admitted towards the end of his life that the research had caught up and or had developed, and that the newer styles were more effective. So it's important that we look at the language he taught and understand what it meant, and that we look at the new language and understand what it means, so that we can actually move forward and leave the old stuff behind in the dust. All right, as we do that, I want to introduce myself so you know what it is that actually gives me the right to be teaching you this. My name is Judith Cobb. I'm a Master Herbalist, Natural Nutrition Clinical Practitioner, and a Certified Comprehensive Iridology Instructor. I have been an iridologist and holistic health coach for four full decades, for 40 years. Now, what that means is that when I started in about 1980, that all of my training in iridology back then was the Jensen style. I've been a Jensenian iridologist. After about a decade of doing that style of iridology, I decided that it wasn't working. I wasn't getting the results I was promised by my teachers that I would get. My clients weren't seeing those results, and the frustration grew. And that was when I was blessed to be able to learn constitutional iridology. And so constitutional iridology has the different language, the different understanding, and that is where I've been for about the last 3 decades. So that is what I am teaching now in the programs. Hi, Bionutrition. Good to see you on Instagram. Thanks for being there. As we look at this concept of old versus new, iridology has been evolving for nearly 200 years. And our understanding of iridology has undergone massive changes, and research has moved us forward, at least those of us who've chosen to keep up with the times. And somehow in that forward movement, the old language has persisted, and that is not helpful at all. Old names that are misleading and reflect a lack of understanding are still widely used. I even see them being used by some people who, like me, have the Jensen background and have gone constitutional. They're using throwback language a lot of the time. And this is not helpful. It is not useful. It really confuses things. Hello? Oh, yeah, when you've got an Instagram name like that, I don't know how to say it. I want to call it Saeed. Glad you're there with me on Instagram. And Davina or Divina, I'm so glad you're there too. Good to see you. Thanks for being with me. So this whole little tutorial today is all about getting current with the language and the understanding. Because the old language that we used as Jensenian iridologists was very diagnostic in nature. The new language is not. The new language is descriptive. In the holistic world, we avoid diagnosing. I'm not a medical doctor. I don't get to diagnose, right? Those are the rules. And if I don't want to spend time in jail and have expensive legal battles, I don't diagnose. I assess. Recommending therapies based on a disease name is prescribing. And as holistic practitioners, we also do not prescribe. Those are very important distinctions here. We know that when someone offers a prescription based on the name of a disease, which is a diagnosis, there are often errors made. So if we have the wrong diagnosis, we end up with the wrong treatment, we don't end up in the right place. And so with holistic iridology, with constitutional iridology, we totally avoid diagnosing, we totally avoid prescribing. You're going to notice as we look at these words, at this language, that the old language is very diagnostic. The new language is very descriptive. And in using descriptive labels rather than diagnostic labels, it allows us to have that open mind to follow the path that the eyes and the person are teaching us they need to go down. So let's start with the first word, probably the very first word. Hi, Zul. I hope I said that right on Instagram. Thank you for being there. And we've got people with us on the webinar, thank you. And I know we've got people on Facebook as well. Thank you. Again, I'd love to know where you're from while I'm teaching. Just type in where you're joining us from. I would love to see that. Formerly, markings that looked like this were called lesions. That is the old word. Now, when we have the definition of a lesion, it is a region or organ or tissue which has suffered damage through injury or disease, such as a wound or ulcers or abscesses or a tumor. So it's talking about some kind of a tissue change. And so we don't use that anymore because that is very diagnostic. This is not saying there's a growth happening in the body. This is not saying that at all. This is actually called a lacuna in the modern language. And with this up-to-date version, this up-to-date word, our new understanding, what we know is the iris is made up of layers of fiber. We were taught as Jensenians that these lesions would go away when we did the right diet, the right herbs, did the right things, that these lesions would go away. In constitutional iridology, we know these don't go away. We know these show inherent patterns. Now, I've done full webinars on trauma and things like that and how trauma shows up in the eye, broken bones and surgeries. And so the word lesion would, when we talked about lesions as Jensenian iridologists, we would talk about, oh, there's been a surgery there, there's been damage to that tissue, there's a growth in that area. But those things are not inherent. They aren't genetic. And so we as constitutional iridologists, we now use the word lacuna. And a lacuna just simply means an unfilled space or gap. So it's a part of the eye that is walled off, that doesn't have the same kinds of things as the rest of the eye does. It has different things happening in it. A lacuna brings our attention to an organ reaction field in the iris, but it does not tell us what is inherently wrong. Davina, thank you so much. She is joining us from London. I assume London, England, and not London, Ontario, Canada. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. It's nice to know that some people are participating with me here. Thank you. So again, a lacuna does not tell us what is inherently wrong. In former times, in Jensenian training, we were taught that this white ring was a sodium ring or a cholesterol ring. We were taught that it meant there was absolutely hardening of the arteries, that the cholesterol would be elevated. We've got Saeed joining us from Shiraz. Thank you, Saeed. Appreciate knowing where you're from. Thank you so much. We know that as we, again, in Jensenian iridologist, and Saeed, that's Iran. Thank you. The cholesterol ring, or the sodium ring as it used to be called, also suggested that with that presence of cholesterol, there'd be hardening of the arteries and a high risk of senility. But what we now know is that's not a really good correlation. The new name for this indication is lipemic diathesis. And if you know what lipemic means, that's helpful. Diathesis means tendency toward. And we can also include in this some other descriptive terms, which would be corneal arcus, corneal annulus, corneal opacity. Those are describing what this marker looks like. Lipemic diathesis does not suggest an imbalance in that. It does not suggest that there's sodium buildup or that there's a cholesterol ring or anything, but it does suggest an imbalance in how the body creates and manufactures blood fats. Okay, and it actually, in the full course that I teach, we look at beyond that, what organs is the lipemic diathesis implicating as likely being out of balance, and how would we need to be changing the diet to prevent further development of this. Jensenians would call these rings nerve rings or stress rings. And we were taught that these rings developed when a person underwent a lot of stress. We were taught that when we nourished the nervous system and when we released the stress, when we were no longer under stress, these rings would go away. We were taught that if you had 3 complete concentric rings, it meant you were in the midst of a nervous breakdown, right? What we actually know is that we're going to give them a new name, contraction furrow. These suggest the person is always ready for the next crisis, that they live in that sympathetic response zone. These rings are actually, they never go away because they are inherent. And actually, if you do a 23andMe study to find out what your genetic structure is, there are genes that correlate to the presence of contraction furrows. They aren't going away, just saying. These rings are much more obvious when the pupil is dilated. They tend to be a little less obvious when the pupil is constricted. Davina is asking, can they change? No, they cannot. They do not get worse. They do not get better. They are inherent. And when we see something like that, when we see that predisposition to the contraction furrows, it just teaches us about what we need to teach our client about nutrition, lifestyle, coping mechanisms, things like that, right? So the eyes tell us the inherent predisposition of the body. The eyes change in certain ways, the irides change in certain ways, but not in response to your diet, your lifestyle, your supplements. When we, and I don't know if you can see this, oh yes, you can on Instagram. I think you can on Instagram. I can see it on my phone, so this is helpful. We were taught that this purple haze that hangs onto the edge of the iris and is actually sitting properly on the sclera was called venous congestion. And we now call this a circulatory ring, because this isn't always about the veins being congested. It's not always about varicose veins. I actually, in my practice, see a really strong correlation between this and blood sugar imbalances, between this and tired adrenal glands. And we know that blood sugars and adrenals have an impact on circulation, right? So when I see this, I'm going to be looking for other things, and this is not going to go away. It can change a little bit, but as with most things in the eyes, it only gets worse. It doesn't get better. It gets more intense. It becomes more prominent. I was taught as a Jensenian to call these lines parasite lines. As a constitutional iridologist, I know we now call these radial furrows. Now, radii solaris certainly describes the marker. That's more of a sort of a Latin name. Radial furrows would be the non-Latin version of that. But the Jensenian interpretation of these is parasites. Parasites, parasites, parasites. Here's what we need to know. The irides cannot teach us about things that are not a part of our DNA. If we acquire a parasite, that parasite is not a part of our DNA. It's not something that we can pass on through a sperm or through an egg to our child, to our offspring. Parasite certainly makes you feel lousy depending on where it is. It can really affect a lot of things with your health, but it's not going to change your DNA. So when a Jensenian says, you've got parasites, oh, we need to cleanse, and when you cleanse, that line is going to go away. I've never seen one go away. I have, because of things my clients have brought in as symptoms, and when I've suspected parasites, I have put clients through some rigorous parasite work to get rid of any alien bodies, if you will, that they had in them that they wanted to get rid of. And I've never yet seen a radial furrow change. Never. Not in 40 years, period. Hi, Marcoa. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us on Instagram. Radial furrows is a much more apt name for this, much more appropriate. It simply means that there is a separation, a genetically programmed separation in the fibers that lets us actually look down into the depth of the eye slightly. Okay. Does it mean other things? Absolutely it does, but we don't have time to go over that. That is in the full course that I teach. We talk about what radial furrows mean and what you would need to be aware of and the kinds of things that you would want to suggest to your client to minimize the impact of these on their health and well-being. Drug spots versus pigment. So I was taught to call all of these patchy little dots of color, and even all of this color, we were taught to call these drug spots and psora and things like that. Now, that's just a huge bad thing. It really is, because what do you hear from North American iridologists especially is cleanse, 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 cleanse. This eye should be blue. When you cleanse, those eyes are going to be the most beautiful shade of blue. You'll get rid of these spots. You'll get rid of all this yellow. Cleanse, 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 cleanse. I got to tell you. So Davina is saying, so larvae to tenant constitution are prone to parasites. I'm not saying they're prone to parasites, because that line doesn't have anything necessarily to do with parasites. Okay, so when we're looking at the pigment here, we've got these spots and we do all this cleanse, 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 these don't go away. North Americans are cleanse happy. It seems to be a badge of honor to announce that someone is full of toxins and you're doing a cleanse. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Now, I'm not saying people shouldn't cleanse. I'm just saying don't cleanse to change your eyes. Cleanse to improve your health. Okay. And so how much smarter would it be just to make the necessary lifestyle changes to not put trash in the body and to never have to do a high-powered cleanse again? So having said that, there is no scientific proof that these areas of pigment are the result of drug exposure, of chemical exposure, or of toxicity. There's also no proof that any of these pigments, whether it's a defined spot like this, or this, or this, or any of this color that's washing over the eye, no proof that that can be cleansed out. We do know, however, that pigment can acquire over time. And I've got examples of that in my clientele, where pigment is inherently programmed, genetically predisposed to develop, where there is a genetic predisposition that an organ may start to have problems at a certain time in life. And so that will show up as pigment in the eye, but we have no way of erasing the pigment. Now, as we look at this, again, pigment may be an indication that an organ may be struggling, but it's an inherent predisposition, and that that organ may be causing stress for other organs in the body. So we need to know what color the pigment is. That tells us some information. And I'm going to just do that. Sorry about that. And we also need to know where the pigment is sitting, because that gives us even more information. And when we have that information, then we have the right information to ask questions of the client to understand if the client is actually having any issues in that area, or is inherently prone to, if there's a family history of problems in that area. We also look at what Jensenians called an absorption ring. I'm going to move my camera really close for my Instagram friends to help you see this better. Can you see that right here, there is a little bit of a gray edge to the iris? And then we have this sort of, well, on my computer screen, it's, I don't know what color it is. It's not white. It's kind of a dirty white color. So we're going not the dirty white, but we're looking at what's just on that inner edge of the iris. This is what a Jensenian called an absorption ring. We call it the inner gray border, the inner pupillary border, the gray inner pupillary border. There's lots of different ways of naming this that are all correct for constitutional iridology. The inner pupillary border, or gray inner pupillary border, is the correct ophthalmological name for the part of the eye we are looking at. This area of the iris correlates to the stomach lining and teaches us about the stomach's inherent ability to secrete digestive juices. Okay, so it's not telling us I have a problem absorbing things. It's teaching us about the stomach's ability to secrete digestive juices. So an entirely different perspective on it. I was taught as a Jensenian to call this a rheumatic eye. Yuck, what a name. Don't like that one. We call it, as constitutional iridologists, this is a febrile eye. When we call it a rheumatic eye, doesn't that make you think that this person should have rheumatoid arthritis and that they've maybe somehow got eye symptoms from that? Well, the febrile iris is usually found in someone who fevered easily as a child and may still be prone to fevers when their immune system is activated as they get older. Certainly the febrile eye gives us lots of other information too, but that is just the basic information. I was taught to call this a weak constitution when I was a Jensenian iridologist. How would you like to be sitting with a holistic practitioner and hear them say the words, "You have a weak constitution"? Would that just make your day? In reality, whether your fibers are densely packed or fairly straight or wavy or gappy shows your predisposition, not your actual condition. So what does that mean? Someone can have an eye like this that has gappy fibers and wavy fibers and so on, which we would call a connective tissue subtype. And they may have learned at a very young age that they needed to watch their diet, they need to take certain supplements, and when they did that, they felt great, their body cooperated, their body did everything they needed it to do. They may have a body that is less resilient, that doesn't respond as quickly, but because they've nurtured it so well for so long, it's functioning at its optimal capacity. That's not a weak constitution, that's a smart person. Conversely, if this person had a junk food diet, drank a lot of fizzy drinks, things like that, they would manifest the lower end of their potential and probably have a lot of different structural physical issues. No, Davina, this is not polyglandular. Well, there are polyglandular bits here, but the more prevalent subtype here is connective tissue. And so as we look at these, again, I've had these clients, I've worked with these clients that have had this kind of a constitution, and they displayed no weakness at all because they did learn the rules for their body early on. Now, these people do need to keep their nutrition on track. They need to be protective of their body and do the right things to help it function well. Conversely, I was taught that this is a strong constitution. That was the Jensenian one. But as a constitutional iridologist, I've been taught that this is a neurogenic subtype. You'll notice that the fibers are fairly densely packed and fairly straight. Now, the challenge here is that if someone has a strong constitution, it doesn't guarantee them good health. This is like taking a Rolls Royce, and they can either take that Rolls Royce car and do the lube jobs and the oil changes and keep it nice and shiny and just take really good care of it, and it's going to last forever. Or it's like taking that Rolls Royce body, which they've got a body that's got good genetic stuff, forget to do the lube jobs, forget to do the oil change, never do the maintenance, never wash it, never shine it up, and it's going to burn out soon, right? Any vehicle would. And so we don't want to call this a strong constitution because that gives people the sense that they can do anything and their body will put up with it. Their body will put up with it for a length of time, but there will come a point in time when the body's going to go, forget this, you don't love me, I'm not loving you back, I'm going to fall apart. So we call this the neurogenic subtype, and as such, it tells us much. The body is resilient, but it also teaches us what kinds of nutritional support, what kinds of emotional support this person needs to keep their body strong and healthy. I was taught to call these little things in here, these little dark spots, bowel pockets. And we went further to say they said meant the person had diverticuli. That's a diagnosis. As a constitutional iridologist, we call these crypts. And while they may suggest areas of weakness or reduced reactivity, reduced vitality, and they may make it more difficult for the body to offload toxins in those areas, we are not making the diagnosis that this is a diverticuli. I don't have x-ray vision. I don't have any kind of imaging equipment that's going to let me look in the body, so I cannot give it that name. Crypts, again, give us a lot more information, and crypts have very specific definitions of what they look like. So every dark spot you see inside here is not necessarily a crypt. The Jensenians call this an autonomic nerve wreath. Constitutionals call this a collarette. The collarette is so much more. It's about so much more. It teaches us so much more than an autonomic nerve wreath. It teaches us about the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Yeah, put the teeth in straight. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. It also teaches us about the tone of the intestinal tract. If it is pigmented, it gives us more insight into how those tissues are being affected by other organs. It gives us so much information. It gives us information about how this body creates energy, how it uses energy, what kind of an eating pattern and what kind of foods this person needs in order for their whole system to function really well. So it's about so much more than just the nervous system. And so it's great that we call it the collarette. The lymphatic rosary versus hydrogenoid subtype. If you're a Jensenian, you know that this is a lymphatic rosary. And a Jensenian would tell you that this is all about the lymph system, and that's it. We call this the hydrogenoid subtype as constitutionals, and this teaches us about not just the lymphatic system, but also the circulatory system. And so when we see this, again, it teaches us that there are questions we need to ask the client to understand at a deeper level what's going on in their body. How is this showing up in their body? Does this actually have any bearing on any symptoms that they have brought in that they want you to work with? If it does, great, we work with it. If it doesn't, we don't work with it just yet because the client's not ready for it. So with all of that, those are some of the key languaging differences between Jensenian and constitutional. Constitutional, again, is much more about language that is descriptive, that helps us to understand more about what's going on, and that allows us, that teaches us the questions we need to ask the client in order to understand more about what's going on, in order to connect the dots. Constitutional iridology is not about us telling the client what's wrong. That's diagnosing. I don't care what language you use. If I say to you, you have this problem, that is diagnosing, and we don't do that. Constitutional is always about asking the questions, about understanding the markings, how the markings work together. We always want 2 or 3 indicators pointing to one area before we actually start pursuing it, unless the client has a symptom that ties in. And it's always about asking questions to gain a deeper insight, to gain a better understanding of our client so that we can create the right wellness programs for them. That gives you a little rundown of North American, and not North American, of Jensenian or old school iridology versus constitutional iridology. I hope you found that helpful. And once again, if you would like to download a constitutional iridology map, hop on over to iridology.education. You're going to see a little pop-up, those annoying little pop-ups that is going to offer you the opportunity to get this. Enter your information there, and you'll receive an email that has a link to a constitutional iridology map. I've enjoyed being with you today, and thank you for being with me. I will see you again Wednesday. Same time, same place. Bye for now.